In this lecture video, we will be talking about the types of the normative ethical theory. So, with the overview of the three categories that I've mentioned, the three categories of ethical theories that I've mentioned in the previous lecture video, no, the normative ethical theory will be further analyzed by these types of normative ethical theory that we will be tackling about. Let's talk about the utilitarian ethics. Now let's talk about first the utilitarian ethics. Utilitarian ethics is normative ethical system that is primarily concerned with the consequences of ethical decision. Therefore, it can be described as theological theory or a consequentialist theory, which are essentially the same thing, actually, both having a notion that the consequence of the act is the most important determinant of act being moral or not. So what does that mean? Ang utilitarianism kasi is a theory of morality which advocates actions that foster happiness and oppose action that cause unhappiness. Diba? Utilitarianism promotes the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people. Okay? It is also described as theological kasi it is also a teleological reasoning which takes into consideration that the ethical decision is dependent upon the consequences of the action. Kaya nga ang sabi dito, ang determinants of the act being moral, okay, are the consequences. Ano ba ang magiging resulta? Okay, that is the utilitarianism's notion. It um it is a theory that determines right from wrong by focusing on the outcomes. Okay? Isa rin siyang form ng consequentialism. Utilitarianism holds that the most ethical choice to choose is the one that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number, yung ikabubuti. Okay? Now let's talk, and so because of this, now let's talk about the importance of utilitarian theory in law enforcement. Moral dilemmas. Okay? Law enforcement officers possess a great deal of discretion. May tinatawag tayong discretion, police discretion, that must be exercised by all officers of every rank regardless of their experience. When exercising this discretion, sinasabi nating discretion, officers will be confronted daily with issues that are complex and may not be covered in the agency's policy and most certainly would not have been covered in their formal education or police academy or other training. Ibig sabihin, in their daily lives, in their daily function as a police officer, magkakaroon sila ng sitwasyon na makakaharap nila, no, that will urge them to make a decision. Tinatawag natin, magagamit na lang tinatawag nating a police discretion that might be not included in the agency's policy. Okay? Diyan papasok ang utilitarian theory or ethics, no? Kasi from a rule of ng utilitarianism perspective, the officer should consider what the consequences would be if there were a rule that everyone was allowed, for example to smoke and sell marijuana. Example lang to. So, if the officer believes that society would be well served by this rule, then the officer should allow the sale to continue. But in reality, ang totoo is it's in the other way around, bawal. So, yun yung magiging basis niya. Number 2, let's talk about the deontology. The word deontology comes from the Greek word deon, meaning obligation or duty. It is an ethical system primarily concerned with one's duty. Okay? The notion naman of this, of duty, that the deontology are talking about here is The notion of duty is important to law enforcement officers who are bound to by the law to perform their duty. From the Greek word dion, obligation, ang duty na tinutukoy dito is something that is required to be executed, regardless of whether the police officer wants or not. They are obliged to do it. Okay? The duty may have a personal or professional negative consequences attached to it, but it has, but as it is a requirement, as it is a requirement or obligation, it is absolute and imperative. Pag sinabi nating imperative, it's vital and it is important. It's crucial. Okay? Kaya nga, in your code of ethics that you have recited, it has been mentioned in there that your decision will not be and should not be influenced by any prejudices, animosities, personal relationships, and any friendships. Yan. Or any personal feelings. Let's talk about the virtue of ethics. For a law enforcement, the major foundation is virtue of ethics, wherein its idea that if you are a good person, you will do good things, and to be good, you must do well. That is simply as it is. That's the only definition and the meaning of the virtue of ethics. The virtue of ethics has its historical background in ancient Greece and was primarily developed by the very well-known Aristotle. Okay? In essence, you do not do good things because of an analysis of the result of an equation to decide how many people will help versus harm. Instead, you do the right thing or good thing because your good character as demonstrated throughout your life. Therefore, the good act is an automatic response requiring little thought. However, when faced with complex ethical dilemmas, the person who has demonstrated a life of good character will show good character using temperance and intellect. So meaning to say, ang virtue ethics is unarguable the oldest ethical theory in the world with origins in, as what I have said, in ancient Greece. It only defines good actions as ones that display, embody virtuous character traits like courage, loyalty, or wisdom. A virtue itself, from the word virtue na lang, okay, a virtue itself is a disposition to act, think, and feel in certain ways. Kasiguraduhan. There are the examples of virtue ethics. Honesty, yan. Honesty, courage, compassion, generosity, fidelity, integrity, fairness, self-control. Self-control is also an example of virtue ethics. And prudence are all examples of virtues. Okay? Now, bakit mahalaga ano ang kahalagahan ng virtue of ethics or the importance of virtue ethics in law enforcement? Okay? Now, law enforcement agencies place a great emphasis on the good behavior of their officers. One way to ensure a strong likelihood of good behavior is to hire those who have moral character that reflects the values of the organization. Remember the example that I gave to you on our very first meeting about that a friend of mine who failed the neurological exam because of what she answered based on the situation that was given to her. Remember that? They cannot be able to hire certain kind of person who has a kind of attitude like that. Okay, di ba? So, in clearly identifying these characteristics, agencies are likely to attract those who are also identify with these characters. Okay? Mga ano to? Uh, Virtue ethics at its core is also simplistic, having two tenets that are important for law enforcement. There's no need to measure consequences or the morality of the action. Simply, the task is to be good and do good acts. If officers are good, they will act in a virtuous manner. Okay? Yan lang ang definition or how you will understand virtue ethics. Okay? Virtue ethics, it suggests kasi treating our character as a lifelong project, one that has the capacity to truly change who we are. The goal is not to form virtues that mean we act ethically without thinking, but to form virtues that help us see the world clearly and make better judgments as a result. Next, let's talk about the ethics of care. This one is also known as the feminist ethics. And ethics of care is primarily concerned with caring for others as it is, simply as that. This has evolved from the need to care for those who cannot care for themselves, such as infants. Let us also include na lang din the PWD. Yan. Police officers routinely find themselves referring non-assault domestic and civil arguments while attempting to bring a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Now, ang role ng ethics of care here, ethics of care is at times an important perspective for law enforcement officers when they see a person in need and decide to perform an act of care and kindness. Officers who perform a caring act are, according to ethics of care, acting out of compassion rather from a sense of duty. It is within this context that ethics of care can be a reminder to law enforcement officers, most especially to you guys, our future law enforcement officers, that often an ethical solution may be to make peace through consensus and understanding rather than resolve issues formally through charges. Okay? Ethics of care also supports the notion that issues should be resolved with compassion. Yeah, ganun dapat. Okay? Not by the example that I gave you, away the two men fighting each other, you as a man in uniform is supposed to stop them, but what had happened? Okay? Yung situation na binigay nung examiner's applicant, the example that I gave you, instead of stopping them, instead of resolving the problem, no, the issue peacefully, the man in uniform itself hits one of those because he was punched, which is very wrong and very, very unethical. Okay, please do not forget that one. With individuals, the building of a rapport is critical to providing compassion in to those in crisis and need. So while explaining the ethics of care, I was also actually extracting the importance of it in law enforcement. Moral dilemmas. Okay? Building rapport kasi with members of the community is an important aspect of community policing. Sinabi natin building rapport, you build rapport when you are building or developing mutual trust, yan, friendship and affinity with someone. Building rapport can be incredibly beneficial to your career. It helps you establish good interpersonal relationships, and this can open actually many, many doors for you, most especially in investigation once you are a police officers who are assigned in um, sa labas, yung mga patrol officers, yan. Okay, building rapport again with members of the community is an important aspect of community policing. This building rapport style, this enables officers to identify issues and to deal with them with compassion. For example, an officer who builds a rapport with tricycle drivers may become aware of people who are involved in illegal drugs. It is with compassion that the officer will be pushed to action to resolve this issue. Or an officer who is called to a convenience store to arrest a mentally ill street person who is stealing food may, instead of arresting the suspect, find an alternative route, such as connecting the person with a social service agency or arranging for a social worker to help the person find a home. Law enforcement officers should attempt, where possible, to address such issues with compassion and respect for all the parties involved. Next, egoism. Egoism is a descriptive principle that does not tell you necessarily how you ought to behave, but rather why you behave the way you do. What does this mean? For example, a psychological egoism asserts that a person will always act in their own self-interest, even when it appears as though they are not. Imagine that someone tells you that they volunteer at a soup kitchen once a month because they want to help the homeless. In simple words, egoism, it is the habit of valuing everything only in reference to one's personal interest. Kumbaga selfishness. Okay? Kaya nga sinasabi dito, unlike other theories, yung mga sinabi ko from 1 to 4, that prescribe how you ought to behave, ang egoism is a descriptive principle that does not tell you necessarily how you ought to behave, but rather why you behave the way you behave, the way you do. It infers that the person who acts in an egoistical manner does so because it is natural to act in this way, and therefore it is normal. It is a normal action unto itself. According to the tenets of egoism, the core reason that someone does any action of self-serving by bringing happiness or some other benefit to him or herself. If someone performs an action that appears to be altruistic, the action was likely performed to give the actor gratification in some way. This may come in many forms, for example, in the form of positive media attention, or just feeling good about oneself. Para tayong tinuturuan dito na maging uh, na mag-act for our self interest, but egoism does not suggest that police officers should act in their self-interest. Ito this is the importance of egoism in law enforcement in moral dilemmas. Again, egoism does not suggest that police officers should act in their self-interest. Certainly, this would not be appropriate for law enforcement personnel, where egoism may help is to better understand why people do things that may appear selfish. This may help them develop empathy for those suspects that appear to be selfish and allow them to be better understand that their actions are driven by egoism. It's for the benefit of the police officers to understand the suspects why they did what they did. It's not for them, it's not for them to act egoism. No, egoism may, I hope I was clear, egoism may also assist them in understanding the motives of others, allowing them to look at these motives with more skeptical that we would otherwise know. Most importantly, egoism can also provide explanations of misconduct among law enforcement officers. Officers who abuse the trust placed on them by the society and abuse their authority could be said to be acting in an egoistic state. Talk about the religion or the divine command theory. Religion is often considered as the most widely used system to make ethical decisions and to conduct moral reasoning. And I know everybody does know why, okay? Kasi one of the examples of divine command theory, no, according to theists, is that God commands, for example, God commands humans not to steal. Thus, humans are morally obligated to refrain from stealing. Okay? Um, Throughout the world, no, people rely on a variety of religions to help them determine the most ethical action to take. Ano ba talaga dapat ang dapat gawin? What are the actions that are just, no? While divine command theory is widely used throughout the world, kahit saan, there are differences. The application of the theory may differ from religion to religion. It may differ within each religion also. Most especially us Filipinos has different kinds of religions, different kinds of beliefs, yan. One of the basic tenets kasi of divine command theory is to use God as the source of all principles. In this way, to rely upon divine command theory, person must believe that there is a willful and rational God that has provided the direction toward an ethical outcome. It is from God's commands that actions are determined to be right or wrong, and because of this, divine command theory provides an objective assessment of what is ethical or moral. However, there's ambiguity in the way in which some scripture is interpreted. Ambiguity kasi, there are some scriptures which are said to be added, said to be, no, there are some people who are not believing, but I hope there are still a lot of people out there who are reading Bible, no? And religion or divine command theory actually, ito yung pinaka-basis ng most ng ilang kapulisan din, na somehow they are being still in the right path because they are still founded by the divine command theory or the divine justice or religion. They believe in the religion. So what is its importance in law enforcement moral dilemma? Generally, for officers who believe in God, a source of comfort may be present when facing death or other traumatic events that non-believers may not experience. Totoo to. Okay? Most especially personnel in uniform. That when you are already in a situation that you might think that it's gonna be the end of your life, it's gonna be the end, it's the dead end, you don't have any choice kasi minsan nga dyan na lang tayo dadasal eh. But this is most especially for those who felt the kind of feeling that I've told you, that I have just mentioned, no? A source of comfort may be present when facing death or other traumatic events that non-believers may not experience. Officers dealing with death may find comfort in the belief that those who die may be in a better place, that their soul is eternal, and that death may mean that the soul goes up to heaven. Believing that death is not the end, but a new beginning, may help officers who practice religion deal with pain and suffering. Ito yung pinaka-basic na importansya, no, ng religion or divine command in law enforcement. No matter how painful it is already, no matter how you suffer already, so long as you know that when you pray, so long as you know, or so long as you believe that whatever might happen to you, that maybe it might be the end now already, you know that you are going to be in a better place after that. And this is not just a story, these are real. Next, natural law. Ito, iba naman to. Natural law is espoused by Saint Thomas Aquinas, who view the world as being created by God and understood that human are rational being capable by using their intellect to comprehend the world. Okay? By extension, God enabled humans to reason naturally to make ethical choices. Aquinas viewed the first principle of natural law as, ito, good is to be done and promoted, and evil is to be avoided. Simply put, natural law asserts that what is good is natural, and what is natural is good. Examples of natural law. Unlike laws enacted by the governments to address specific needs or behaviors, natural law is universal, applying to everyone, everywhere, in the same way. For example, natural law assumes that everyone believes killing another person is wrong, and that punishment for killing another person is right. What is its importance of natural law in law enforcement in moral dilemmas? Natural law can reaffirm in officers the importance of their job, that being to preserve their own life and the human species. Officers could be reminded that property is not as important as life, and that their sole function should be publicly safety. rather than protection of property, which is one of the common law duties of police officers. Officers should also use natural law as a reminder of the importance to preserve their own lives when confronted with dangerous situations, and that is natural to want to protect oneself. Natural law. Natural lang na when you are already in a dangerous situations, you are going to preserve your own life. And of course, the lives of your team. Next is the Rawls theory of justice. John Rawls was a contemporary philosopher who studied theories surrounding justice. His theories are not focused on helping individuals cope with ethical dilemmas, rather they address general concepts that consider that how criminal justice system ought to have or ought to behave and function in a liberal democracy. So what is the main idea of the Rawls theory of justice? His theory actually of justice is fairness describes as a society of free citizens holding equal basic rights and cooperating within an egalitarian economic system. Para kay John Rawls, each person is to have um, or must have an equal right to the most extensive basic liberty compatible with a similar liberty for others. Pare-parehas ng karapatang pangkalayaan. Social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are both, number one, reasonably expected to be everyone's advantage, and number two, attached to positions and offices open to all. Actually, maganda rin tong idea niya eh. These principles actually should be adhered to according to Rawls to ensure that disadvantages are neutralized and everyone receives the same benefits of justice. Rawls further addresses ethics in the individual, though this is not the central tenet of his theory, and is somewhat of a general statement of how moral people should behave. So that's all for this lecture video about the types of the normative ethical theory. Thank you.